There's a specific kind of silence that should terrify you. Not the silence of someone who was always cold, not the silence of someone who never cared, the silence of someone who used to care too much, for too long, about too many people who never noticed. And then one day, without warning, without a fight, without a single raised voice, they simply went quiet. You've probably met this person. Maybe you've watched it happen to them. The one who always helped, the one who always understood, the one who always gave one more chance, one more explanation, one more piece of themselves. And then something shifted. They didn't get angry. They didn't take revenge. They just stopped. And that quiet is louder than any scream. Carl Jung spent his life studying the parts of us we refuse to look at, and he understood something most people never will. The most dangerous person in any room is not the cruel one. The cruel one is loud, obvious, easy to defend against. The truly dangerous one is the good person who finally understood the game, because their kindness was never weakness, it was a choice, and the day they stop choosing it, everything changes. In this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly what happens inside a good person on the day they go quiet. The 7 stages of that transformation, what breaks, what dies, and what is born in its place. And by the end, you'll understand the darkest truth Jung ever pointed to. When a good person goes silent, something inside them dies that day. But it's not their goodness, it's something else entirely, and once you see what it is, you'll never look at a quiet person the same way again. Let's begin. The first thing you have to understand is the mask. Because before a good person can go quiet, you have to understand the role they were trapped in for years. From the time we are children, we learn that being good gets rewarded. Be helpful, and people like you. Be agreeable, and people keep you around. Be the one who never causes problems, and you earn a place at the table. So we build a version of ourselves designed to be accepted. Jung had a name for this. He called it the persona. The mask we wear to meet the expectations of the world. For most people, the persona is harmless, a professional face at work, a polite face with strangers. But for the good person, the mask becomes a prison. Because somewhere along the way, they stopped wearing the mask, and the mask started wearing them. They forgot it was a role. They began to believe that their entire worth was tied to how useful, how pleasant, how accommodating they could be. Saying no felt like a betrayal of who they were. Disappointing someone felt like a crime. Think about what that actually does to a person over years. Every time they swallowed their own needs to keep the peace. Every time they said yes when their whole body screamed no. Every time they comforted someone who had hurt them, because being the bigger person felt safer than being honest. Each one of those moments was a small surrender, and they didn't notice. Because the mask was rewarded, people praised them for it. So good, so patient, so selfless. But here is what Jung understood. A persona that grows too strong starts to suffocate the real person underneath. The more perfectly you play the role of the good one, the further you drift from who you actually are. You become a stranger to yourself, performing kindness you no longer feel, smiling at people you've started to resent, giving from a well that ran dry a long time ago. And notice how the world conspires to keep you in the mask. The people who benefit from your goodness are the loudest voices telling you how good you are. They have every reason to keep you trapped in the role, because the role is what serves them. The moment you show a flicker of the real person underneath, a moment of anger, a moment of need, a boundary, they act wounded, surprised, betrayed. That's not you, they say. You've changed. And the good person, terrified of losing the only identity they've ever been praised for, retreats back behind the mask and apologizes for the crime of being human. Every retreat tightens the cage a little more. That's the quiet horror of it. The mask isn't forced on you by an enemy. It's reinforced by everyone who loves what you do for them and has never once asked who you are when you're not doing it. You become useful instead of known, needed instead of seen. And being needed feels, for a while, almost like being loved. That's the lie that keeps the whole thing running. The good person confuses the relief of being needed with the warmth of being valued and spends years feeding a hunger that only grows. And this is the trap. The good person can't even complain about it because the mask doesn't allow it. Complaining isn't what a good person does. So the resentment has nowhere to go. It doesn't disappear. It goes underground. It sinks beneath the surface into the part of the mind Jung spent his entire life mapping. And that brings us to the second stage, because everything they swallowed didn't vanish. It was collecting somewhere, and it was waiting. Here's what almost no one understands about the good person. While they were smiling on the outside, something was bleeding on the inside, quietly, for years, and no one saw it, including them. Jung called it the shadow, the part of yourself you refused to acknowledge, all the anger you weren't allowed to feel, all the resentment you buried to keep the peace, all the times you wanted to scream, to walk away, to say what you actually thought, and instead you smiled and said, "It's fine." None of that disappears. It gets pushed down into the shadow, and the shadow remembers everything. Picture a man who keeps every receipt. Every time someone took his kindness and gave nothing back. Every time he showed up for a person who wouldn't show up for him. Every time he was the one who apologized first, even when he was the one who'd been wronged. He's not keeping score consciously. He'd be ashamed to admit he noticed at all. But the shadow keeps the ledger for him, in the dark, where he can't see the numbers growing. And this is the cruelest part of being good. The better you are at hiding the wound, the deeper it cuts. Because no one comes to help someone who never seems to need help. No one checks on the strong one. No one asks if the giver is running empty. So the bleeding continues, invisible, behind a face that says, "Everything is fine." Think about the last time you saw someone like this. Maybe it was you. On the surface, calm, dependable, endlessly patient. Underneath, a pressure building that no one could measure. Every unspoken no, every swallowed truth, every moment of being taken for granted, stacked on top of the last one, year after year after year. Jung warned that what you refuse to face in yourself doesn't stay buried forever. It grows in the dark, it gains weight, and the longer you deny it, the more powerful it becomes, until one day it demands to be seen. The good person thinks they're being strong by holding it all in, but they're not getting stronger, they're getting closer to the edge, and they don't even know the edge is there, and the shadow doesn't just wait quietly, it leaks. It comes out in the exhaustion they can't explain, the resentment that flashes for a second before they push it back down, the strange numbness that creeps in where joy used to be. They start to feel tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. They snap at the wrong people over small things, then hate themselves for it, because a good person isn't supposed to snap. They feel a coldness building toward the very people they're still serving, and it scares them, so they overcorrect, give even more, smile even harder. The mask works overtime to hide a shadow that's getting too big to hide. This is the part no one sees from the outside. From across the room they still look fine, still steady, still the one everyone leans on. But inside, two forces are now at war. The mask that insists everything is fine, and the shadow that knows everything is not. And a war like that can only stay hidden for so long. Something has to give. The only question is when, and what small, ordinary thing will finally be the one to break it open. Because there is always a limit. Every well has a bottom, and the day they reach it is the day everything changes, which is exactly where the third stage begins. The breaking point never looks the way people expect. They imagine an explosion, a screaming match, a dramatic scene where the good person finally loses it. But that's not how it happens. The real breaking point is almost always quiet, and that's what makes it permanent. It usually comes from something small, not the big betrayal, not the obvious wound, something tiny. One more request when they had nothing left to give, one more time being overlooked, one more moment of realizing the person in front of them would never, not once, do for them what they had done 100 times. And in that ordinary, forgettable moment, something inside them simply finishes. Jung described moments like this as a confrontation with the shadow, the instant the buried truth finally surfaces, and you can no longer unsee it. For the good person, that truth is brutal in its simplicity. I have been giving myself to people who would never do the same for me, and I have been calling it love. I have been calling it being a good person, but they were just taking, and I let them. There's no anger in that realization. That's what people get wrong. Anger still cares. Anger is still hoping the other person will change. What comes instead is something colder and far more final, a kind of clarity. The hope quietly closes its eyes. The part of them that kept believing if I just give a little more, they'll finally see me. That part goes silent, and it doesn't come back. Think about a candle that's been burning at both ends for years. People are used to its light. They take the warmth for granted. They assume it will always be there. They never imagine it could run out. And then, without a flicker of warning, it simply goes dark. Not because anyone blew it out, because there was nothing left to burn. That's the breaking point, not a fire, an ending. The moment the good person stops waiting to be appreciated and accepts that they never will be, not by these people, not in this role. And the terrifying thing for everyone around them is that nothing on the outside looks different yet. The smile is still there, the politeness is still there. But behind the eyes, a decision has already been made, and from that decision, the silence begins. Not as an accident, as a weapon they didn't even know they had. Now watch what happens next, because this is where the transformation becomes visible. The good person starts to go quiet, and the silence is not what people think it is. At first, the people around them barely notice. He stops explaining himself, someone questions his choices, and instead of the long, anxious justification he used to offer, there's just a shrug. He stops arguing. A person tries to bait him into the old conflict, the one he used to lose every time by caring too much, and he simply doesn't show up for it. He stops overgiving. The requests come like they always have, and for the first time the answer is a calm, complete no, with no apology attached. Jung would recognize exactly what's happening. The energy that used to pour outward into everyone else, into keeping everyone comfortable, into maintaining the mask, is being pulled back inward. He's withdrawing his life force from the people who drained it and turning it toward himself for the first time in years. This is the beginning of what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are instead of who everyone needed you to be. And here's the part that unsettles people. The silence is more powerful than any outburst ever was. When he used to get angry, people knew how to handle it. They could argue back, play the victim, wait for him to calm down and apologize, because he always did. But silence gives them nothing to push against. There's no fight to win, no guilt to trigger, no reaction to manipulate, just a closed door where there used to be an open one. And this is what no manipulator is ever prepared for. Their entire power depended on getting a reaction. The guilt, the apology, the over-explanation, the rush to fix things. That reaction was the fuel. Take it away, and they're left holding a strategy that suddenly does nothing. They keep performing the old moves into empty air, and each move that fails makes them more uncertain, because they're realizing the person in front of them has stopped playing the game entirely. Think about how disorienting that is for the people who relied on his reactions. For years, they could predict him. Push here, he feels guilty. Pull there, he comes running. He was reliable, and his reliability was exactly what they exploited. And now, the levers don't work. They pull, and nothing moves. They push, and there's no give. The person they thought they had mapped completely has become unreadable. There's a strange dignity in it too. When he stops explaining himself, he isn't sulking. He's discovered something most people never learn. That an explanation is often just a request for permission. For years, he explained himself because some part of him needed the other person to agree that his feelings were valid, that his choices were allowed. The moment he stops explaining, is the moment he stops asking permission to exist. He no longer needs you to understand him in order to act. That is a quiet kind of sovereignty, and people feel it instantly, even if they can't name it. And the good person isn't doing this to punish anyone. That's the thing. There's no scheme behind it. He simply stopped spending himself on people who never invested back. But to those people, it feels like the ground shifting under their feet, because the silence is showing them something they never had to face before. It's showing them, for the first time, exactly how much he was carrying. And that revelation leads straight into the fifth stage, where his eyes finally open. Something strange happens once the noise stops. Once a person stops pouring all their energy into managing everyone else's feelings, they start to see clearly for the first time in their life, and what they see cannot be unseen. For years, the good person looked at the people around them through a fog, not because they were stupid, because they wanted to believe. They saw potential where there was only pattern. They saw a misunderstanding where there was actually disrespect. They saw someone who's just going through a hard time, instead of someone who treats everyone this way. They kept making excuses because the alternative, seeing people exactly as they are, was too painful to hold. Jung had a precise word for this fog: projection. We don't see people as they are. We see them as we are. We paint our own hopes, our own goodness, our own loyalty onto them, and then we fall in love with the painting instead of the person. The good person is the master of this. They assume everyone has the same conscience they do. They assume that if they're kind enough, patient enough, understanding enough, the other person will eventually rise to meet them. And so they keep giving to a painting that was never real. But when the silence comes, the projection drops. And in that cold clarity, they finally see. The friend who only ever called when they needed something. The partner who confused being loved with being served. The family member whose affection always came with a price tag. They see it all, plainly, without the soft filter of hope. And it's a brutal thing to witness, because it means grieving people who are still alive. Mourning relationships while the person is still standing right in front of you. Think about how much energy it takes to keep believing in someone who keeps showing you who they are. To keep rewriting the story so you don't have to face it. Now, imagine all that energy suddenly freed. That's what cold clarity feels like. It's not bitterness. Bitterness is loud and wounded. This is quiet and exact. It's simply the ability to see what was always there, finally unobstructed. There's a specific grief that comes with this stage, and it's worth naming, because it's the price of clarity that no one warns you about. When the fog lifts, you don't just see other people clearly, you see yourself clearly too. You see all the years you spent making excuses for them, all the warnings you talked yourself out of, all the moments your gut told you the truth and you called it being judgmental and overrode it. You realize you weren't only betrayed by them, you were betrayed by your own refusal to believe what you already knew. And that's a harder thing to forgive, because the person who ignored every red flag was you. But that grief is also where the strength is born, because once you've forgiven yourself for needing the illusion, you become almost impossible to deceive again. You've felt the exact cost of looking away, and you will never volunteer to pay it twice. And here's the part that frightens the people around them. You can no longer fool someone who has stopped lying to themselves. The performances that used to work, the guilt trips, the half apologies, the charm that always reeled them back in, none of it lands anymore. They see the move before it's made. The fog is gone, and with it, every advantage that depended on the fog. But clarity alone isn't the end of the story, because seeing people clearly does something to a person. It changes the way they move through the world, and that change is the sixth stage, the one that makes them magnetic and unsettling at the same time. Here is the paradox no one warns you about. The moment a good person stops chasing approval, they become more attractive than they ever were while chasing it, and it makes the people who ignored them deeply uncomfortable. While they wore the mask, they were easy to overlook. Availability has no value. The person who always says yes, who's always there, who never demands anything, fades into the background. We don't respect what we can take for granted, so the more they gave, the less they were valued. It's a cruel equation, but it's the truth. Their endless generosity made them invisible. Then the silence came. The boundaries came. The calm, unbothered no. And suddenly, something shifts in how others perceive them. Jung would say they've begun integrating the shadow. They've taken back the parts of themselves they disowned, the capacity to say no, to walk away, to put themselves first, to be, when necessary, a little dangerous. And a person who has integrated their shadow carries something most people never have: wholeness. They're no longer at war with themselves, no longer leaking energy trying to be liked. And that quiet completeness is magnetic. Watch what happens around a person like this. The ones who used to dismiss them suddenly want their attention. The ones who took them for granted start trying to win them back, because human beings want what they cannot easily have. The person who needs nothing from you holds a strange gravity. They can't be bought with flattery, can't be moved by guilt, can't be manipulated by the old tricks, and that unavailability makes them powerful in a way their kindness never did. But understand, this isn't a strategy. That's what makes it real. They didn't go quiet to become attractive. They didn't set boundaries to manipulate anyone. The power is a side effect of no longer abandoning themselves, and that's precisely why it works. People can sense the difference between someone performing confidence and someone who genuinely no longer needs them. The first can be faked and seen through. The second cannot be faked at all. And notice the test that this new state quietly performs on everyone around them. The people who truly cared about the good person are relieved by the change. They were never comfortable taking anyway. They wanted a real equal, not a servant, and now they finally have one. They lean in closer, but the people who only ever valued the giving, who needed the imbalance to feel powerful themselves, those people panic. The same silence that draws the right people in pushes the wrong people away. Without lifting a finger, without a single accusation, the good person has built a filter that sorts every relationship in their life into what was real and what was only ever convenient. That is the hidden function of the silence. It tells the truth about everyone by simply removing what they were used to taking. Think about what that does to the people who exploited them. They're now standing in front of someone they thought they owned, realizing they have no hold left, no leverage, no way back in, except on terms they're not used to, terms of actual respect. Some of them rise to it, most of them can't. And they're left confused, even angry, asking what happened to the person they used to be able to count on. What happened is simple, and it brings us to the final stage, the one that reveals the darkest truth Jung ever pointed to, because something did die in that good person the day they went quiet. But it's not what anyone thinks. So, let's go back to the beginning, to the question underneath this entire video. When a good person goes silent, something inside them dies that day. Everyone assumes they know what it is. They think the goodness died. They think the person turned cold, bitter, hardened. They look at the silence and they mourn the warm soul they think is gone. And they are completely wrong. The goodness didn't die. Here's the truth Jung spent his life circling. What died that day was not their kindness. What died was their need to be approved of, their need to be chosen, to be validated, to earn their worth through how much they could give. That's what went silent. The endless, desperate hunger to be seen as good by people who were never going to see it. That hunger died, and everyone mistook its death for the death of goodness itself, because they had only ever known a goodness that came begging. Think about what that actually means. For years, their kindness was tangled up with need. They gave so they would be loved. They helped so they would be valued. They couldn't say no because they couldn't survive the disapproval. Their goodness had a string attached to it, a string that ran straight back to their own fear of not being enough. And as long as that string was there, they weren't free. They were performing goodness to fill a hole inside themselves. When the need died, the string was cut, and what's left is something far rarer and far more powerful: goodness without need, kindness that can't be exploited because it no longer comes from emptiness. They can still be generous, but now it's a choice, not a compulsion. They can still care, but they can no longer be drained because they finally care about themselves first. Jung called the goal of all this individuation the birth of the true self, and the true self can only be born when the persona dies. The mask had to die for the man to live. This is why the silence is so unsettling to everyone around them. It's not that the good person became bad, it's that they became free, and free people cannot be controlled. You could always reach the old version through their need. Praise them, and they'd give more. Withhold approval, and they'd chase it. But you cannot manipulate someone who no longer needs your approval to feel whole. There's no handle left to grab. And understand how rare this actually is. Most people never make this crossing. Most good people don't go quiet. They go bitter instead. They keep giving while resenting it, keep saying yes while hating themselves for it, keep the mask on until it fuses to their face and they forget there was ever anything underneath. They die with the strings still attached, having spent an entire life earning a love that was never going to arrive. That is the more common ending, and it is a quiet tragedy that plays out in millions of people who were told their whole lives that goodness meant self-erasure. The one who goes silent is the one who refused that ending. The silence is not the tragedy. The silence is the escape from it. That's the line Jung was always pointing at. The descent into the shadow is not a fall. It looks like a fall to everyone watching from the outside because they only see the warmth withdraw. But from the inside, it's the only road that leads to becoming whole. You have to go down into everything you buried, the anger, the need, the truth about the people you loved, before you can come back up as someone who can no longer be owned. The good person who goes quiet isn't descending into darkness. They're walking through it, on the way to the first real light they've ever had. And here is the final quiet truth. The day a good person goes silent is not the day they stopped caring. It's the day they stopped needing you to notice that they cared. It's the day their goodness finally belonged to them instead of to everyone who used it. They didn't lose their soul that day. For the first time in their life, they actually found it. So if you've ever watched a good person go quiet, understand what you really witnessed. Not a heart turning cold, a person finally coming home to themselves. They didn't become cruel, they became free. And that freedom is the one thing the people who used them could never forgive, because it was the one thing they could no longer take. And maybe, as you've been listening, you've recognized yourself somewhere in this. The mask, the quiet bleeding, the exhaustion of being everyone's good person while no one is yours. If so, understand this isn't an ending, it's a beginning. The silence isn't where you go cold, it's where you finally begin to belong to yourself. In the next video, I'll show you the next stage of this journey, the one Nietzsche understood better than anyone. What happens when you stop being good and start becoming dangerous in the way that actually sets you free? Watch that one next. It's the other half of this truth, and once you've seen both, there's no going back.